When looking back at the characters we've analysed so far as part of our Bleach Forgotten Characters series, they each share a common through line. That being the obvious fact that these are all characters we would have loved to have seen substantially more from within the story of Bleach, but for whatever reason we didn't get a chance to. And I think that goes doubly true, more so than ever before, for the recipient of today's video, being Kukaku Shiba, the Rukongai's premier fireworks expert, but perhaps more importantly the current head of a fallen noble house of Bleach. Kukaku has this incredibly wild, fiery, unique design that I think really left an impression on fans and also made it so that people wanted to see more from this character in the future. But perhaps most crucial of all for Kukaku is the fact that her time in Bleach is so criminally fleeting. Her existence in this story is surprisingly small. In fact, when I went back to do some research on Kukaku, when I looked at the chapters of Bleach that she was involved in, I was genuinely surprised at how little she actually appeared, especially when you consider how well liked she is by fans, the amount of prestige and renown she has among fans, and also the genuine mystery that surrounds this character. In fact, I would go so far as to say that out of the three characters we've analysed so far for this series, Tessai, Ryuken, and now Kukaku, she has the least amount of screen time among them all. And so in this video, we're going to take a look at the character of Kukaku Shiba. We're going to look at an overview of the character, how she was used in Bleach, some of the theories surrounding her, and what I thought of the character overall as well. Before we get started, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now for more Bleach videos like this every single week. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, as well, as it really does help support me and the channel, as it means we, get more exposure on the whole YouTube algorithm. If you like what I do here and you want to take that support for me another step further, we do have a Patreon for the channel as well. You can get videos like this one early, and you can support me for as little as $1 a month. You obviously do not have to do that at all, but an enormous shout out goes out to everyone who is supporting me over there. I really, truly appreciate it. Thank you all so very much. So, much like the characters who came before her as part of this series, Kukaku is a very interesting character who just gets absolutely no time to do anything whatsoever in the story. And I think there are crucial chunks of this character that are just completely missing, and that's kind of why fans have been wild with speculation about Kukaku for so many years. It could just be that this character was never intended to be anything more than she is, but her links to the nobility, her links to our main character, and her prominence within that family lead me to believe that there must be more to this character than meets the eye. Now, with a manga lifespan stretching from chapter 78 right the way through to 518, you might be forgiven for thinking, well, actually, maybe she shows up a decent amount, as that's a pretty hefty lifespan. But the reality is this character maybe appears in less than 10 chapters throughout those goalposts, and that's not unheard of in Bleach. A number of, say, Sternritter are a bit like this as well, but it feels a lot more intense with Kukaku because she plays such a pivotal role in those first batch of chapters we get with her, only to completely vanish from the storyline for 400 chapters or so, and then reappears for a single chapter in the final arc and is never seen again. And on that note, before we carry on, there will be spoilers for the final arc of Bleach's manga in this video. So to talk about Kukaku, I think we first need to briefly talk about the Shiba clan, and this is something I want to do a video on in the future, but I would say outside of the Kuchiki family, they are probably the most prominent noble family throughout the series. We do get to see, obviously, Yoruichi as part of the Shihoin family, but she's really our main point of focus with that family in Bleach. The Shiba family, we get to meet virtually all of its kind of top members. Kukaku, her younger brother Ganju, their deceased older brother Kaien, and much later on we find out the truth that even Ichigo's father, Isshin, was a member of the Shibas as well. Now, the Shiba family fell from grace at some point prior to the start of the main storyline, and it is never really concretely said why, although I think we can infer reasons to this. Now this video, as with all of these Forgotten Characters videos, is going to be focusing on Kukaku's appearance in the canon Bleach manga, but she does have appearances outside as well in the supplementary material, which do dive a little bit deeper into both her and the history of the Shibas as well. Now when you look at the characters of the Shiba family, let's start with Kaien briefly. This character, admittedly, it's a little unfair for him because he is dead before the story actually starts, so to say he doesn't have a massive presence would be doing him a bit of a disservice, but at the same time he has huge emotional ties to the early stage deuteragonist of Bleach, Rukia. Now admittedly her importance wanes a bit as the story progresses, but she has major emotional moments, mostly thanks to her past relationship with the former vice captain of the 13th Division, Kaien Shiba. This is a character who essentially forms the moral compass that this entire noble family follows, and you get the impression as well that the Shibas, despite being a former house of nobility, despite being former aristocracy of Soul Society, don't really buy into that life at all, and I assume that they probably never really did. They've always probably kind of felt like outliers. Then you have Ganju Shiba, who is her younger brother. He's goofy, but he means well, and he actually gets a fairly major role in the Soul Society arc as that kind of member of the outside group who joins the main group of friends and goes with them on their journey. The Soul Society arc kind of has two of these, Hanataro also taking that kind of role, but that's a little bit later on. Ganju is the one who really goes with them from the start, and then he kind of reprises this role in the final arc as well. And then of course there's Isshin, who is literally the main character's father and shows up in every arc of the series and does a decent amount. That leaves us with Kukaku Shiba, who is the older sister of Ganju, the current head of the house now that Kaien is dead, and she doesn't really do a whole lot. She occupies this very weird space in the series of a character who must be of some renown, must be of some kind of high standing. Now obviously the Shiba house has fallen, but that doesn't mean that her position within the power of Soul Society has necessarily changed. It feels like she is potentially captain level, but she's just living almost like a hermit on the outskirts of Rukongai. And it is weird to me that this kind of character is just allowed to exist just outside the walls of Seirei. You know, the Soul Society is a very structured environment. The Gotei 13 is a hierarchical society, and it's obvious who is in charge. The captains are the highest ranking officers, the captain commander is even in charge of them, and then in the final arc you get the Royal Realm, the Zero Division on top of that as well. And so it seems weird that there is this total pariah, this outlier who is seemingly pretty powerful and maybe has some deep ties, deep history to Soul Society as well, just casually existing outside in Rukongai. And this is where I think the major chunks of her character are truly missing. Her history. I think that would be absolutely crucial to learn more about Kukaku Shiba. As we find out as her kind of storyline progresses, there are some oddities, I think, that within the overarching lore of Bleach would seemingly make her quite important, but it's never really brought up. Also, she seems to have ties to major characters like Yoruichi and Kisuke Urahara, which are completely unexplained. Now, if you kind of look at the nobility as a whole, they all existed within the Seirei. They're all Shinigami, so presumably Kukaku and Ganju were Shinigami as well, but this is never, again, really confirmed. They both have weapons. You know, Kukaku has a sword strapped to her arm, her missing arm, and Ganju has seeming like a small, broad, almost like a flat blade. Now, these might not be Zanpakuto, and instead it seems like, in my opinion at least, the Shiba family kind of control the elements. Like, Ganju has earth magic, it seems, with his Separ powers. It seems to me like Kukaku is supposed to represent fire with the way she ignites the Kukaku flower crane cannon. And Kaien, of course, his actual Zanpakuto Nejibana was water-based. Now, this is kind of thrown off whack a little bit by Isshin, who it turns out also has a fire Zanpakuto. So maybe Kukaku is somehow air or wind, but I'm not entirely sure. But basically what I'm trying to get at is, are these characters actually Shinigami? It kind of makes sense that they would no longer don the robes, especially since they have a pretty bad relationship with the Soul Society, at least to some degree. Ganju absolutely hates Shinigami in general, whereas Kukaku seems to be a little more reserved. I feel like she's keeping a lot of stuff to herself, and she has a decent relationship with characters like Jidanbo, for instance. So my guess would be these characters are Shinigami, as the Shiba family presumably started out within the Soul Society, especially since Kaien Shiba and Isshin Shiba were allowed to rise to pretty high-ranking positions. The timeline is definitely iffy. You get the impression that the Shiba family fell a long time ago. And again, this is something I want to discuss more in a separate video dedicated to them specifically. But in my opinion, it makes sense that the Shiba family has kind of been on a sliding slope for a very long time, only dramatically falling off and basically being cut out of the nobility and severed about 20 years prior to the main storyline. I have no idea if that really makes any sense, but basically, the history of the Shibas, in my opinion, is that they were probably always Shinigami, they were probably always part of the Gotei, they probably, enjoyed that life of aristocracy within the Seirete. In Can't Fear Your Own World, we discover that in the very earliest days of the world, the 5 ancestors of the noble houses decided to basically tear apart the Soul King to prevent him from ever turning against them. And the one family that didn't agree with this was the Shibas. And in my opinion, I don't think that necessarily immediately meant that they fell, but I think that that has been a sliding slope for them forevermore. And this kind of is reflected in their characters, I think. They don't strike you as typical members of the nobility. In my opinion, goofy's not the right word, but they kind of come across as very hearty characters, very honest characters, which I think is crucial as well. They don't seem like they would look down on people. They seem to be like men and women of the people. And so I think the Shiba family probably was on a sliding scale for a little while, and then eventually the destruction, essentially, of the heads of this family led to their banishment, their exile, the death of Kaien and his wife, and then this was solidified by Isshin Shiba's seeming treason and abandoning the Soul Society entirely. And so perhaps from that point on, Kukaku and Ganju were then forced out of Seirete and have been living outside the walls ever since. Now, the very start of her storyline in Bleach, basically, Ichigo and the gang, they're trying to get into Soul Society, trying to rescue Rukia. For some reason, they think it's a great idea to go in through the front door, which I don't know if Yoruichi really thought that through. Ichigo defeats Jidanbo, but then they inevitably come up against a captain, Gin, who basically sends them flying, but presumably could have done a whole lot more damage if he wanted to. So instead, they decide to kind of take a detour and go meet Kukaku, who Yoruichi knows can basically blast them into Seirete. Now, admittedly, it's a dangerous method, and it's not exactly stealthy, but I'm surprised that Yoruichi's first instinct wasn't to leverage her friendship with this old fireworks master rather than just knock on the front door. But regardless, they arrive at Kukaku's palace. Now, when they get there, Yoruichi explains the situation to Kukaku, who basically outright says, because Kisuke is involved in this, I can't turn down the request, or I won't turn down a request if Kisuke is involved. That implies a couple of things. It obviously implies a relationship of some kind, they know each other from the past, and it to me implies that Kukaku either owes Kisuke, or just really, really likes him, or respects him. This again is completely unexplained, but I do have my own headcanon, my own theories, so if you just bear with me. If we take Isshin running away from Soul Society as being the catalyst for the Shiba family's actual fall from grace, it kind of makes sense that when Isshin left, we know that he runs into Kisuke, we know that's where their relationship begins. Kisuke might have realized that this would mean bad things for the rest of the Shiba household, so maybe he arranged for Kukaku and Ganju to have safe passage out of Soul Society. I've no idea, that's just my own theory. Maybe he did that working with Yoruichi. Yoruichi helped them get out, because of course she was exiled by this point as well. I've absolutely no idea. That's just a theory on my behalf. That's how I would assume Kukaku knows Urahara, why she feels that she can't turn down his request, but Leave your theories in the comments below, I'd love to hear them. But Kukaku reveals herself to be Rukongai's premier fireworks expert, which feels a little arbitrary, but fireworks are a theme that kind of seem to run through this family. Ganju uses them actually in battle, which I always really liked as well. And we also get to finally see the Kukaku the Flower Crane cannon, which seems to be a staple of the Shiba clan. One thing I'm not sure on, and the answer to this will really determine a lot about this character, is if Kukaku herself, being the quote-unquote fireworks master, actually invented this cannon. If she did, that means that she must be ancient. And there's a good chance that she is. There's a good chance Kukaku is another of these characters, much like Unohana, who looks way younger than she actually is. But I've got no real evidence for that. The thing is, if she didn't create the Flower Crane cannon, that maybe makes a little more sense. Maybe it's some kind of Shiba clan artifact that they've had all this time. If she did create the cannon, and the cannon is very important for reasons we will get to later, and in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, if she did create the cannon, then her age is unfathomable to me, which is why it's easier to imagine that she didn't create it. The only invention that we categorically know she created was the sphere that allows them to harden their Reiatsu and turn into a cannonball, essentially. Now, who Kukaku Shiba is cannonballing through Seirete on a regular basis, I've got absolutely no idea, but it's convenient enough to get them into the Seirete for the plot. The flower cannon is a bit strange as well in its first appearance, in that it seems to be covered in some kind of almost like a stone casing, which makes it look like a smokestack. Uryu mistakes it for a chimney when he first arrives. When Kukaku decides to first activate the cannon, this casing shatters, it like breaks away. Now, I'm guessing that they're not always covering this thing in a stone casing, so maybe it's literally never been fired before. Or maybe this is something that they rebuild around it every time they want to kind of, just leave it dormant for a little while. When we get to the final arc, we see that it hasn't been recovered, so maybe, I don't really know why they've got this thing. I guess it is supposed to be a disguise, but the Shiba household is not exactly inconspicuous, so I don't know about that. I'm not. It's very ostentatious, very gaudy, and I like that again because that does fit with the Shibas being kind of over the top. Again, this idea of being very hearty individuals. But the canon, I think, I'm not sure if it is inconsistencies or if it's just weirdness. Like, maybe they do rebuild it every time they fire someone out of it. I've got no idea. And I feel like me saying that I don't have any idea is a recurring theme in this video, and that just goes to show you how fascinating Kukaku is, but how little we have to go on about her. But essentially, Kukaku's role here is to let them all train for a little bit in the Kukaku Shiba household, and then eventually blast them off to Seirete. Couple of nice moments here with this character, a bit of introspection. She seems to maybe understand Kaien on a deeper level than Ganju did, perhaps because Kukaku and Kaien were maybe closer ages, we have, again, no idea. But when Kukaku decides she's going to help the Shinigami, Ganju is a bit like, well, I don't think we should do this, how would I face brother? What would brother think about this? But Kukaku, in a nice, quiet moment with the sun setting, speaks to Kaien, and she's like, I'm going to help them. I think you would scold me if I didn't. But honestly, the dynamic between Kukaku and Ganju relating to Kaien is weird. And it's always left a bit of a weird taste in my mouth, because it feels like Kukaku is, for some reason, hiding crucial information from her little brother that she only shares with him almost as a second thought right at the end of this character arc. But we'll get there when we get to the end of the Soul Society arc. Another small detail I really like is there are a couple of big banners within her house that read the Law of the Jungle. You can kind of, again, the Shibas feel a bit wild, especially in comparison to the other noble houses in the Soul Society, but you can imagine the Shibas adopting this mantra when they became pariahs, looking out for themselves and nobody else. And I like that. I think that fits them quite well. Now, I'm going to say Kukaku activating the cannon, firing these guys into Seirete might be one of the best visual sequences in the entire series. And I know that sounds hyperbolic, but just look at this thing. I love the way it's drawn. It's so unbelievably dynamic, and this is obviously Kukaku's coolest moment. And it's just awesome the way it is showcased here. So it starts out, and this is quite a small little detail, and honestly I don't think it's anything, but it's fun to bring up. Kukaku is using her only arm to basically draw with a massive calligraphy brush a huge circle of black ink around the base of the cannon. And I can't help but wonder, with the benefit of hindsight, if this is something Ichibei taught her. Probably not, but I love that anyway. I think that's a neat little thing, especially since Ichibei would eventually end up here later on in the story. And I just actually thinking about that, just want to talk briefly about Kukaku's design, her visuals. I think this character looks great. I think this is an example of Kubo's ability to take a character who might just kind of look a bit, not basic, but uninteresting maybe, and then slap a bunch of different things to her, and it somehow doesn't look over-designed. She's got this brilliant crimson red outfit that looks like a sort of bastardized makeshift version of a Shinigami Shihaku show, but again, wild, more revealing. There's less to it, again, like she's living kind of on the land. I think that's really awesome. She's got these like wrappings in her hair as well. She's missing an arm. She has tattoos running up her other arm. So many disparate elements, but I think they come together really well for this character, and she looks like almost that kind of manic explosives master. And I think that's such a unique but really awesome position to hold in this universe. Now, she stabs her blade into the ground, which is interesting in itself because it implies that the sword has some kind of role to play in the ignition ceremony. Again, is this thing a Zanpakuto? We've got no idea, but we know that the noble houses have ceremonial blades, but I don't think that's what this is. As I mentioned, Ganju has a sword as well. It just seems like the blade is somehow a conduit for this method 2, as she calls it, of launching the cannon. But like I said, I just love how this whole sequence looks. It flows really well. She grabs the kind of bandage wrappings off of her hair, and they coil like a snake around her arm before her entire arm just ignites. It sets a flame ablaze. She brings her arm down like a mighty hammer upon the top of the sword, cracking it like a nail, and this massive wave of fire, this torrent, this burst of flame shoots through the ground straight up the cannon and blasts Ichigo and the others into the sky. It is so good. It's so good. And her attendants, Kogane Hiko and Shirogane Hiko, are kind of watching in awe as this thing just blasts off, and they congratulate her for another successful launch. Now, a lot of people have always wondered about Kukaku's missing arm, and also the strange decision to simply add a prosthetic version in the anime. That is an odd censorship in my opinion, because her missing arm is always bandaged. There's no gore there or anything like that. She's just missing an arm, but the anime chooses to add a prosthetic, which I think kind of dampens the design a little bit. But people have always wondered how she lost that arm, and I feel like it's fairly obvious, although this is literally just a guess on my part. But perhaps because she literally uses her arm as a conduit to launch this cannon, it seems pretty obvious to me, or likely anyway, that a long time ago, when she was way more inexperienced, she messed it up and lost her entire arm as a result when she ignited it. And now she can do it, and it all works out absolutely fine. That's just my guess anyway. It feels kind of likely to me, but I could be wrong. But that's pretty much it for Kukaku's major relevance in Bleach. There's a nice character moment where, normally her personality, she's very brash, very, not thuggish, but she is quite mean to basically everyone around her. And again, you kind of understand why. She's had to live as a pariah and exile for however long. She probably does hold some bitterness. They've kind of turned their backs on their own people, but they've been forced to do that. And so Kukaku, you imagine, has hardened herself. You get the impression that they look out for family and family first. And there's a lovely moment where she treats Ganju like, just rubbish most of the time, but right at the end, when he flies off, she has this look on her face and she's like, please be careful, Ganju. And that's a really nice moment. Now, Kukaku, right at the end of the Soul Society arc, clearly decides to intervene to help out Yoruichi, presumably. And to me, This makes a lot of sense, and it makes no sense that she doesn't intervene in the Urankar arc, which is a huge war against Aizen. All of the Soul Society is coming together, and I can kind of understand it, maybe, on the basis that she doesn't consider these Soul Society battles her problem, because the Shiba family has been exiled at this point, has been shunned. But if that were the case, why on earth is she letting Ganju go to rescue Rukia Kuchiki? That is a Shinigami problem. Is it because Yoruichi's involved? If that were the case, then she should be fighting in this battle as well. Now, I understand it from a narrative perspective. There are nearly always characters who show up per arc that don't show up again. But I think the Shiba family are important enough that they should have warranted an appearance in the Urankar arc. It is so weird that we don't see them until the final arc. But she decides to get involved in this final clash. She goes and speaks with Jidanbo, which again is a really cool moment. She knows him clearly quite well, knows him well enough that her access into the Soul Society seems to be unregulated, or that she just gets in and no one seems... there is a lot of crazy stuff going down at the point where she arrives, so people probably aren't paying too much attention. But there's a lovely moment, a manga exclusive moment that's not in the anime, again, for whatever reason. Maybe they thought it'd throw the pacing off, but Kukaku lands crashing down on Jidanbo's back. A really cool moment to help Yoruichi now that Aizen is revealed to be a villain. And Aizen summons the other 3 Gate Guardians to his side. They're all under some kind of spell, probably Kyoka Sugetsu, I guess. But basically, Kukaku fights them off. She defeats one of them using a massive Hardo 63 Raikoho, albeit with the incantation, but it's enough to defeat this Gate Guardian in one hit. In the anime, she simply uses Raikoho to absolutely no effect on Aizen himself. After Aizen escapes and things sort of settle down, everyone kind of goes back to their business, we get to see Kukaku back at her house, kind of admonishing Ganju for just kind of overall being a bit useless in Soul Society, telling him that she'll whip him into shape for the next time. And Ganju keeps saying, there won't be a next time, there won't be a next time. But it's kind of funny to think that, 400 odd chapters later, there actually was a next time. So that's kind of neat. But then we get to the bit that I am a little bit conflicted on. So Rukia arrives, and she is being eaten up inside by guilt over what happened to Kaien. She feels that she is at fault. She blames herself for what happened to Kaien on that night. She thinks she robbed Kukaku and Ganju of their older brother and the kind of face of the Shiba family, at least as far as Rukia was concerned. Now, we, as readers, have the benefit of an omnipotent view of the story. We know full well that Rukia was not to blame. Kaien took it upon himself to fight Metastasia. He loses because of its broken ability that Aizen has given it, and he becomes this horrible, hollow hybrid monstrosity. We also kind of know, or you can infer anyway, that Kaien manages to regain even just the smallest ounce of his humanity and throws himself onto Rukia's blade to finish himself off. And his corpse begins to break away, he disappears, and he thanks her, for allowing her to take his heart with her when she goes. It's a beautiful moment. It's Rukia's entire emotional core. And she has been feeling terrible guilt about this. We also know as well that Ganju absolutely hates this Shinigami. Interestingly, he knows what she looks like, but he doesn't know her name. Which is again weird to me because the Kuchikis are nobility, like they are, the aristocracy. I'm surprised he doesn't know her, especially since she was in his brother's division. But regardless, he only recognizes her by face. But he hates her. He doesn't want to help her out. He believes that she murdered his brother in cold blood. And it is weird. This whole bit just feels like maybe it wasn't quite put together properly. Because when you know how Rukia feels about Kaien, when you see that night play out, and as emotional as it is nearly impossible to imagine her arriving at the Shiba homestead, dragging his corpse, and dumping it on their doorstep, with this demonic look on her face, as Ganju says. Realistically, I don't understand how she took his body away in the first place. It seems to be breaking down, and also, I just don't think Ukitake would have allowed her to just walk off with his corpse. And also, she would be like crying her eyes out. Maybe she couldn't tell Kukaku what actually happened, but I think it would be pretty obvious that it wasn't really her fault. Now, what also rubs me the wrong way about this is that Kukaku reveals to Rukia and to Ganju that Ukitake told her already what went down. So she says that she decided a long time ago that she would forgive Rukia the moment she turned up. But she's allowed Ganju to hold on to this hatred for no reason. I'm kind of surprised that after Ukitake talked to her, she didn't just go to Ganju and be like, look, I found out the truth about Kaien, this Rukia girl. It doesn't sound like it was her fault. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time, but, she was there for him. Rather than just not telling him anything and letting him think that Rukia is this demonic monster who murdered his brother in cold blood. Maybe she did tell him and he doesn't believe her, but that seems highly unlikely to me. The way this is framed, it's supposed to be a revelation to both Rukia and the reader and Ganju that Kukaku has known and made peace with this a long time ago. So I just think that's a bit of a weird, iffy moment that maybe wasn't developed enough or put together enough. It feels like the way Kukaku treats that, the way she lets Ganju just go about hating Shinigami, hating this idea of Rukia, doesn't really vibe with what Kaien would have wanted. And now, despite having a decent role in the Soul Society arc, despite actually arriving for that final showdown, Kukaku and Ganju are not seen for, it has at least 400 chapters or something insane like that. I'm going off the top of my head here. I think their final appearance in Soul Society is something like 181. And they don't appear again until 518, which in my opinion is totally unacceptable. There's just no reason for it. Especially when Kaien plays a decent role in the Iran arc with the whole Aranero battle. And so it kind of felt to me like Kubo wanted Kukaku to just be this one and done character, but they shouldn't have made her so interesting. But the thing with Kukaku as well is her appearance in the 1,000-Year Blood War arc is literally limited to 518. And also there are some major repercussions for the lore in this chapter and her character. Let's talk briefly about the Zero Division. The Zero Division are supposed to be the most elusive, exclusive group of captains the Soul Society has ever known. Many of the current modern day captains have probably never even seen these people unless they actually happen to be around in the Gotei when they were there, like Hikifune, for instance. But they have never seen these people for the most part. And yet, apparently, their mode of transport, the Tenchuren, cannot return to the royal palace on its own. And so they end up at the Kukaku Shiba homestead to be blasted out of the cannon again like this is normal procedure. So, do they have a prior relationship with the Shiba family, with Kukaku? Has the Royal Guard ever met Kukaku before? Or do they just turn up at her house and they're like, this is how it has been for over a millennia, we need to borrow your cannon? The whole thing is so weird to me. Now, obviously, the Shiba family, as we said, they are a noble family. They were there at the earliest days of existence, along with extraordinary beings like Ichibei. And it's just so weird to me. I guess the Royal Division, they are so above everything that I think the fact that one of the houses had fallen from grace would mean nothing to them. So I guess they might just have this long-standing agreement with the Shiba family that they will send them back up to the royal palace. Maybe they used to come down just using their massive set of stairs. Honestly, I really like the royal palace. I think it's done quite well, but I think the methods of transport to and from it were a little bit half-baked. It's all just a bit weird, the way they keep kind of blasting off and coming back down again and doing it over and over again. And Mayuri builds a replica of the cannon, and then they blast off again. That's for another video. But regarding Kukaku herself, does she have a relationship with them? It's very difficult to say since they don't share any dialogue whatsoever. A lot of people back in the day used to theorize that Kukaku was a member of the Zero Division, but was maybe kicked out because she lost her arm or because of the fall of the Shiba family. I I used to like this, but I don't really like it anymore. I don't really think it makes a lot of sense. I don't think she would have been kicked out just for losing her arm, and I also, like I mentioned a minute ago, think that the Zero Division is so far above everything that's happening in the Gotei 13. You know, the Gotei looks positively tiny in comparison, that if Kukaku were with them and the Shiba family fell from grace, I don't think they'd care. I don't think they would care, because she's not really a Shiba anymore. She's first and foremost a member of the Zero Division. But regardless, I don't think she ever was. And this kind of brings me back to that point of how old is Kukaku, and the only reasonable explanation for this is that, no, she's not the inventor of this canon. Some ancient Shiba ancestor probably made it, because if she were, she is like over 1,000 years old, if not older than that, and has been transporting the Royal Guard this entire time. So, and that's another thing as well, like, so when Hikifune is, I literally just thought of this right now, when Hikifune is promoted in Turn Back the Pendulum, Kyoraku says, I think she's probably gone and met up with the rest of them already. So do they send a Tenchuren down for her, and then she gets in that, and then they blast her off on her own? Or do all the Royal Guard come down for that kind of, is that a ceremony, like an induction ceremony? I've got no idea. But 518 is a weird chapter, and I'll be honest with you, I loved this chapter back in the day. It was so good. So much happens in it. Characters are resurrected. It's a crazy chapter that, in my opinion, is very emblematic of the Thousand Year Blood War as a whole. Just crazy shenanigans happening at breakneck speed, loads of characters involved, and very little time dedicated to each portion, which makes the whole thing feel a little bit weird. Now, I know that Kubo is not going to go out of his way to draw that whole ignition ceremony again. That's, you know, fair enough. But the blasé way they send them back up to the Royal Palace is kind of jarring. Kukaku, there's a small panel of Kukaku literally saying, right, let's get this thing going, and then they just blast off. And it doesn't seem like she's used the wrappings in her hair this time because she's still wearing them. Or maybe this is a different method of firing someone, as they're not firing them towards the Seirete. But I mean, they kind of are, because they're firing them up above the Seirete. I don't really know. It doesn't seem like she went through any of the same preparation here that she did in that initial chapter back in the Soul Society arc, but maybe that's just Kubo skipping over it entirely. In which case, the fact that she hasn't removed her bandages, her kind of headdress, feels like maybe an oversight, but I'm not entirely sure. It could just be a totally different method of sending someone up. In the Soul Society arc, they do mention there are two methods, so maybe the one for the Royal Guard is method one. Honestly, the Tenchuren is just a really weird device. Like, how do they even get it back into the palace? Does it literally just crash land? It kind of looks like it does twice. The one they send up later on, when they're kind of going up to the Royal Palace to prevent Yuha Bark from killing the king, literally crash lands, but that's not a Tenchuren, I guess. That's more makeshift, so maybe that's why. The first one we see does somehow land perfectly on the landing pad. I guess they've got a map or something. Ganju does have a map later, so maybe that's how that works. The whole thing feels weird. This chapter, in retrospect, feels really weird. And even the return of the Shibas, which should feel like a big deal, because Ganju also returns in this chapter, is, in my opinion, overshadowed by other bigger character revivals. So many characters come back in this chapter. For me personally, I was way more excited about seeing Execution again, Ginjo, Tsukishima, and to a lesser extent Giriko, than I was Kukaku and Ganju. Like, I was really happy to see Kukaku, and then they brought out the Fullbringers, and I was like, what? I couldn't believe it. And earlier in that chapter, freaking Grimjo comes back. Now, admittedly, it's only an arm and like a leg, but people were more excited about that than they were about the Shibas. So even their return is kind of a bit mellow. And honestly, like, that whole scene just feels like a conduit for the Isshin reveal, where Kukaku says, you know, we have to let them go, even if it'll make our uncle sad, referring to Isshin. Again, this is weird. Like, it's weird to me that the Shibas never seem to bring up the connection between Ichigo and Kaien, despite multiple other characters doing so. They look identical. And maybe this is because they already know of Ichigo's heritage. Maybe they already know who his dad is somehow. I don't know. That's a weird one again to me. And it's also weird that Ichigo ends up with this familial relationship with the Shibas, which kind of makes sense. And also I feel like Kubo retroactively tried to make Ganju look more like Isshin. They have this, like, Ichigo is related to the Shibas. They're like his step cousins? Is that a thing? I don't know if that's right. But nothing is ever made of it, and that's so weird to me. It felt like Isshin being a Shiba was a big revelation, like a big, or not justification, but like validation of the theories people had surrounding Ichigo's heritage. And for Kubo to do nothing with it, to not even mention it, was a little bit strange to me. And this is what I mean as well, like Kukaku, in fact, Kukaku does know that Isshin is Ichigo's dad, because that's why she says, if we let him go, it will be making Uncle sad. So she knows of their relationship. So that's kind of weird to me, again, that they just don't say anything to him. And so we come to the end, essentially, of our video on Kukaku Shiba, the current head of the fallen Shiba clan and the premier fireworks expert of Rukongai. A really awesome character, another member of Bleach's incredibly diverse cast who just looks so memorable, instantly memorable, and you just want to know more. You're desperate to know more, but there isn't anything really given to us of substance. This is a character who is a bit of a strange one in that she is so intimately tied to many of the major players in Bleach and has no history whatsoever. Like, you feel like you could have seen her in Turn Back the Pendulum, maybe, if she was around at that time, but there's nothing for her there. But that's basically it for this video, the latest episode of our Bleach Forgotten Characters series. I really hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments below what you think about Kukaku Shiba. What do you think about her history? Do you think she was maybe a captain at one point before being booted out of the Gotei 13? When do you think the Shiba house fell officially? Was it Isshin leaving that really was the catalyst for that? And, you know, just tell me more about how you feel about Kukaku, Ganju, Kaien, the Shibas as a whole. Alright guys, but I really hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and until next time, I'll catch you later. I'll see you then.